goes back to that like importance of having role models, because I think especially for girls growing up, if you don't see people in those roles, if you don't see women in the tech industry, then you just don't even realize that's a possibility for you, right?
Having those messages from girls that will say, oh, I'm the only girl in my computer science class, and sometimes I just have to put my headphones in and listen to you two talk because it reminds me that I deserve to be here. As soon as you start a new thing, you are not going to be good at it. You're probably going to suck and you're going to fail and it's not going to go well. But if you don't start, if you don't put out your first podcast episode, you're never going to reach your 100th podcast episode and get that audience and start building a following. The most important thing to do is just start.
Lola and Orthy both work in the tech industry and met at the University of Auckland in Auckland, New Zealand. Lola is 23 and studied software engineering before becoming a full-stack developer for 1.5 years. Full-stack engineer is a mixture of front-end and back-end, where front-end means working with the product's user interface and back-end is focused on how things work behind the scenes. Afterwards, she transitioned into a delivery lead role, a more managerial role focused on the delivery of software products. Orthy is 25 and studied computer systems engineering and became a full-stack developer at the same company as Lola after school. They decided to start their podcast, Hot Girls Code, about a year ago, thinking about misconceptions regarding what a computer programmer does or the certain type of person that will typically become one. They thought it would be important to have role models of people who work in tech other than the traditional stereotypes that still seem to dominate the perception of the industry. I discovered their podcast on Instagram and I'm quite a proponent of the topic, being a data engineer myself. Especially as a girl, I remember studying computer science in college and hearing statistics like about 1/5 of computer science majors in the US are women, and just not feeling super comfortable because I didn't see a lot of other girls in classes. It can make an intimidating course of study even more intimidating, so I'm glad they've created a resource for others who might feel the same but still be interested in learning about coding and tech. In this episode, we get into their career journeys in the tech industry so far, as well as their journey in building and maintaining the podcast. So this is great content for you if you're working in tech, considering a career transition into tech, or currently studying coding or wanting to, or if you're wanting to build a podcast. I'd love to start by asking you both a bit about the origin of your podcast in your own words.
Yeah, that's a funny one actually. So it happened in the heyday of COVID. And I unfortunately got struck down with COVID and I was lying in bed, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this. When you're sick and you can't do anything, and I just hate that feeling of not being productive. I feel like I just had a bit of a fever dream. And I started thinking, oh my God, I want to start a podcast with Orthy. And I started just making little designs, thinking about a name, and I put together a little basic logo of Hot Girls Code. And then I messaged Orthy and I was just like, hello. You know how we like to talk a lot and how we always talk about tech and how we're two young girls killing it in the tech industry? And Orthy literally was just like, yes, are you asking me to start a podcast?
Like, before she even mentioned a podcast, as soon as she said, you know how we like to talk, because like prior to this, we would often have these like hot chocolate catch-ups together. We work together and sometimes lives get stressful, work gets stressful, we'd go and get hot chocolates and we just talk about our careers and how we were finding it. And yeah, Lola was like, we always have these great talks and we love to share with the world. And straight away I was like, she's asking me to start a podcast. I've thought about this too in the back of my mind and been like, no, that would be crazy. And luckily Lola was COVID crazy enough to be like, no, we should do it.
I feel like COVID was such a time of origin for so many side projects and stuff, just because of having more free time. When did you start technically? Because I know the first episode, it looks like it was like December of 2020 or maybe November.
Yeah, so we first started talking about it at the start of 2022, I think in about March or so. And then we had the idea, we talked about it a little bit, and we were like, oh my God, yes, let's do this. But then as things happen, you go back to work and you get busy again. And then we actually did an all-woman hackfest together. And one of the guest speakers was this amazing woman, Sim, who has her own podcast, Girls That Invest. And we were just totally inspired by her. And we actually asked her an audience question being like, do you have any advice for people starting their own podcast?
Yeah, and she was just like, just do it. And then we went and met her afterwards and she was like, you remind me of me and my best friend Sonia when we were going to start Girls That Invest. I just believe in you guys. And we were like, Sim believes in us. We have to do this. So that was about July 2022. And that was when we were like, let's get serious. And we worked on it for a few months and we launched November 2022. But we'd done a recording of a first episode that actually will never see the light of day because we listened to it and we're like, we can do better than this. Let's try one more time and then learn as we go.
So funny the first time as well, because it was just like we just went off on so many tangents, and like it was probably like 90 minutes or something, and we just talked about all these different topics, and we were like, okay, maybe we need a little bit more structure, but like we can keep working on this.
Wow, I love hearing that. Also, I have heard Girls That Invest. It's a great podcast, so it's so cool that you like met someone who does that. Did you listen to podcasts before? Is that why you thought maybe, oh, this would be fun to start one? Were you big podcast listeners?
I was like, especially during COVID, doing the 1 hour of exercise, going for a walk every day, you'd get a bit lonely, and I got tired of listening to like the same music, and I started just listening to podcasts. And so I listened to quite a range of like educational podcasts, as well as just like the usual, just people chatting with their friends and stuff, and the combination of it all. And I think that definitely helped when we started, because we could, we knew what we liked in other people's podcasts.
Also, both of you talking about how like the first episode you recorded and then we're like, we can do better. I feel like it would be nice to have another person where you can bounce ideas off each other. Sometimes I do solo episodes, and I've just recently started to structure them a bit more. I'm surprised at how much I can just talk on and on.
It's almost harder with two of us, because we've been friends 6 years now, and we like do just chat normally, and sometimes when we're recording we'll just go off on a tangent because we're just two friends chatting, and then we're like, wait, no, this isn't on point, no one else wants to hear this. And also sometimes you're like, no one else needs to hear this.
Yeah.
Or like in our, because we have like weekly catch-ups, and then at the start of every catch-up on our agenda, literally the first agenda item is just mental health check-in. And there have been multiple occasions where our mental health check-in has taken like a third of the hour. Like it's been 20 minutes of an hour-long meeting, and we're like, okay, we should probably talk about the podcast now.
That's good that you have weekly check-ins. And yes, the mental health check-in is a good thing. Sometimes it needs some overflow. That sounds reasonable, for sure. Love to hear the origin story. I also love the concept of your podcast because obviously, as a fellow girl in tech and just studying computer science in general, it's really easy to forget how challenging or difficult or the frustrations I felt in school now that I have a job. And then even when I first got my first job and I was experiencing these frustrations, it's almost like I'm used to it now, so I don't even think about it. And I really like how I click through your why highlight on your podcast. And it's talking about the statistics and how women maybe aren't welcome or encouraged to pursue this. And I think it's just really relevant. What sort of impact do you guys hope to have with what you're doing and the education you're spreading through the podcast?
We want to make a resource that we wish that we had when we were first starting out, when we were studying in uni, and we first get that bout of imposter syndrome and all these guys around you, and you're like, oh my god, they all sound so confident and so like totally fine with coding, and I'm so confused. So we wanted to make the resource that we wish that we had, so that we could help girls that were in that position where they were either just starting out or at the end of high school deciding what they wanted to do, and to really show them, actually tech is a place for you, like it's not too hard and we're here to support you.
And then also in general, one of the other big motivations was tech is taking over so much of the world, and we wanted to make sure that all the resources that even non-technical people had weren't just coming from the same voices, because quite often people talk about how they don't follow along because they don't relate or they don't feel like engaged in it. And so we wanted to try and just put just a different perspective out there so that people would be like, actually there are different ways to explain some of these concepts that they've had in tech for years and years. One example is in an episode where we talk about IDEs, which is where people write code. All the examples online were talking about toolboxes and tools, and we were like, that's great, but not everyone works with tools, not everyone enjoys that. Let's put a different perspective. Let's do a makeup kit and do mascara and eyeliner and how that relates to different elements. And so it's just putting that different perspective, so whether they want to pursue tech or even if it's just someone that uses tech a bit in their day-to-day job, just making it feel like, oh, it's not this foreign, scary thing. This is something for me. And then they can feel more confident having opinions on tech in their lives and in their work.
I love that. That's such a good point. Also, not having someone who looks like you or someone you can relate to oftentimes when you're young and you don't know what to study or what to pursue, it can be like, I don't see a place for me in that industry, so I'm just gonna not deal with that or go that route. I think that is really valuable. And on that note, what do you both think would be helpful about having more diversity or more women in tech? Because I've seen your statistics about how it's distorted and how that could have negative impacts in terms of the products and coding in general.
I love that question, and it's something that we do talk about quite a bit in some of our episodes, because everyone talks about women in tech, and it's okay, so we know that this is an issue, but why is it an issue? So I think basically what it comes down to is the importance of diversity and actually having those people in the room where decisions are made. Because, for example, if you're creating an app and say you only had people who were right-handed in the room deciding on how things were going to work, then suddenly you put the app out and all these people who are left-handed can't use it because that's something you didn't take into consideration. It's a similar thing with having any diverse groups in the room where those decisions are being made. So, like, for example, with women, say you're creating a period app and it's all just men in the room making decisions, then there's a high likelihood that they're going to miss out on really important features that would actually improve that product for women. So I think that's one of the really important parts of why it's so important to have women in the tech industry.
To build on that, it's not just the decisions being made, but often when products are being built, there are compromises that have to come up as you try to deliver something. Things take longer. And if you don't have a diverse team of people that are building the app, they can't advocate for the different diverse things. So they might be like, oh, why do we need to have period tracker app? For example, why do we need to be able to vary cycle lengths? That makes it way harder for us to build this. Let's just make it has to be a 28-day cycle. If there's no women on the team, sadly, often men will just be like, yeah, that sounds about right. How many people don't have 28-day cycles? Whereas if you have a diverse team, there can be people who be like, oh, like some people's cycles vary, things like that. And also some studies have shown as well that when you have diverse perspectives on a team, you're more likely to consider the perspectives of people not on the team as well. So it wouldn't just be like if we have just men and women in one team that they'll cover everything. There's non-binary people, but there's more likelihood that you'll consider those 9 non-binary perspectives because you already have conflicting perspectives on the team. So by amplifying the diversity in one area, you help make sure everyone's aware that there's diversity all around.
Yeah, those are both really good examples that you both just had on hand, which I love. But in general probably applies across the board in ways that might not be so obvious. Even working styles, it's probably good to consider all sorts of people with different tendencies and preferences and everything.
Yeah, there's one example that has been viral on the internet a bit recently, and my manager actually brought it up to me as well, and it was a little girl Googling the soccer player that's had the most certain types of hits or something, and Google gives like a guy, and then the girl was like, no, but I'm pretty sure this female soccer player has had more, and when she Googles it, oh no, she did have more, but Google had just assumed that they were talking about men's soccer. And so that's quite a great example of how, without meaning to, there's been a bit of bias that's been built into that search engine, and that kind of thing is harmless at that scale, it might seem like, but it can grow, it can really build. And there's another great Netflix documentary called Coded Bias, which is all about this kind of thing where, unfortunately, as we're building these like smart systems, we are building our own biases into them, and that can really cause some issues.
Yeah. Okay, wow, need to watch. Sounds great. And I really like that you two are spending time learning about this and spreading this information, because I think it's so easily overlooked. Even as a current engineer myself, it's just not something I consider day to day. So I think that's really valuable. But now I want to talk a little bit about your experiences in tech. What are some good and bad things about working in tech from your experience so far? And I know that's very general, but that's the question.
I can go first. I think some of the good experiences I've had working with tech, a big thing is definitely the flexibility. We're very fortunate that the company we work at is really into work-life balance, and tech also helps amplify that. We can work from home, we get to work on these cool things, and having that flexibility to work wherever you want to work and being able to work flexible hours and things like that, it is such a privilege, and I absolutely love it. It's meant that I can have such a full life outside of work, which unfortunately not everyone gets to have. Lola, did you want to do a good example as well?
Yeah, I think one of the things I really like about being a software developer is that it's actually a lot more collaborative than you might originally think. Because I know when Autie and I were both at uni, we were, I don't know if I'll be a software developer. I don't want to just sit at my laptop and code all day. That doesn't sound very fun. But actually, when I had my first experience of an internship in the workforce, I realised, actually we've got all of these agile ceremonies and we have to be collaborating with designers and product people, and we need to review each other's code and we pair program together. So I actually think that it's a really good balance of having some time to just problem solve and work on things in your own time, but then also have that collaboration with others. So I think that's quite a cool environment to be working in.
Another good thing I thought of while Lola was speaking was also one of the cool things about working in tech is there can be some scaremongering on the internet around technology and a lot of fear that people are trying to put out there. And it's really nice to be able to just read that stuff and understand where they're lying or exaggerating, and having that technical foundation to be like, actually, that's not correct and they're wrong, and being able to have that kind of technical literacy is quite nice and refreshing. In terms of not great things about working in tech, obviously one of the big reasons we started the podcast was because we felt like there weren't enough women in tech, and there have been times where that's impacted us in different ways. We've had situations where it can be a bit of a boys' club. Like I once had a time at work where there was a bit of banter happening at a work thing, and I actually went to the bathroom and cried and was just so upset. And afterwards, when I was like, that really hurt my feelings, the guy was like, but I was just joking. I didn't think it would hurt your feelings. And I was like, yeah, it was just a bit mean. Things like that can be a bit rough sometimes.
Or people just assuming that we work in marketing because we don't look like software developers. I guess it's those unconscious assumptions that people have, and then when they realise, actually, you are a software developer, we hope that kind of rejigs it in their brain and they realise, okay, so software developers can have diverse features. They can be men, they can be women, they can be outgoing. They don't have to be that classic stereotype of what people think of when they think of a software developer.
Those were all really good answers to my very general question. You guys did excellently. As for the negative things, because those are fresh in my mind, I can definitely relate to both of those things. Just not feeling like you fit in, definitely an experience that, again, I just feel like I've gotten used to out of you just need to make it work. And then the second one, I think I used to get a kick out of surprising people with my answer of what I did. But the more I get older, I guess I don't experience that as much. When I was even studying computer science, I had this connotation of what that meant in my mind. And it was a barrier to me embracing coding because I was like, I don't really want to be what I think what that means. And it's just this 100%. Weird psychology thing that I feel like ultimately held me back from really being like, yes, this is a thing.
I actually almost didn't study engineering at all because I had that where my sister studied law and she's a few years older than me. And when I told her I was considering studying engineering, she was like, you'll hate it. Like, you won't fit in. No one's going to be like you. I was a theatre kid in high school and she was like, you're not going to find your people. It's going to be miserable. And I was like, I don't want to be miserable at university. That's meant to be one of the best times of my life. And I genuinely considered not doing this entire degree because I was like, I won't fit in. Luckily, my mum was like, don't be an idiot, actually go to some of the open days that they have to go hear people speak and stuff. And I was like, okay, no, there are normal people, it's okay. Yeah,
it goes back to that importance of having role models, because I think especially for girls growing up, if you don't see people in those roles, if you don't see women in the tech industry, then you just don't even realize that's a possibility for you, right?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, so relatable. It's just nice sometimes to talk about that. Now I want to pivot and talk about the podcast. Really interested to know your experience, deep dive into that. I'm going to start by asking you both about your social media. It's so good. It's so aesthetic. So how did you both learn that or decide that was something you wanted to prioritize with the Instagram of the podcast. And is that the only platform you're on, or are there other ones as well?
So currently we have an Instagram and a TikTok, which we keep up to date. So they're at hot_girls_code if anyone wants to find us. And it was quite early on in the piece where we decided there's kind of two tangents here. So we've got the podcast where we want to be educational and we want to provide all this information. And then on the other side, we wanted to be able to provide that information in kind of small snippet sizes so people can actually receive it. And also for marketing purposes, so in order to try and reach more people with the podcast. Right from the get-go, that was like our two-pronged approach. The social media has always come hand in hand with the podcast. And I guess in terms of kind of the aesthetic, that has always been a high priority for us as well. I love a good aesthetic. When we were first starting out, it was like, okay, what is our look going to be? What's our logo going to be like? What are our colours going to be like? And then we just try and be consistent with both the way that we display that information and also the voice that we share that information with. Like, we try to be quite relatable and we try to use examples that make sense to us and that we think will make sense to other girls and women. Because as Audie said, like, a lot of the time, those examples out there are catered towards men. Here we're talking about object-oriented programming, and all of the examples are about cars and trucks, and it's, okay, I don't care about that though.
Yeah, and so Lola does majority of our social media when it comes to Instagram and stuff, and she's quite a talented graphic designer in her own as a side project for her, and she's always been like I think any person that knows Lola personally would describe her as being very aesthetic. And when we like started all of this, she was like, these are the brand colors that I think would work well. We spent so long picking the right shades of pinks. I think it was like 6 or 7 shades of pink, and we just went back and forth and we were like, what feels like us? And not only do we want to be relatable, a big other thing is we want to be optimistic, because sometimes it can be so disheartening, some of the messages we're saying, like some of these stats are so sad, but we want people to not look at those and be like, this sucks. We want people to be like, great, I can do something about it. And even picking the shade of pink, we were like, this feels optimistic. Like it's a bright pink. It's not a sad pink.
Yeah.
I think we had something like 70 logo variations, like when we were first picking them. I'd make one, I was like, oh, let's try a different font. Oh, let's try a different colour. And then I like went through them with Autie and I was like, okay, which one should we pick?
Oh my gosh. Okay, it's good knowing that all that work went into it, because it's very good. And I'm very impressed personally. And honestly, now I'm inspired, because I think that's a good point. The social media, like it or not, is a whole different ballgame than the podcast. There's a whole different set of like skills and like strategies and like things you can do. I follow accounts for educational purposes if I think they're going to be posting about something I'm really interested in. The fact that you have those graphics with the statistics and are sharing all those resources in a way that is aesthetic, which I think does play into the growth of any account, and just it looks good. I'm going to enjoy seeing this on a regular basis. I do think that's like a whole other thing, but I think it's really useful to have, and then hopefully can bring people in to listen as well, and they can like work hand in hand. That's a journey I'm on as well. How do you find that you have marketed the podcast so far? Has it just solely been through those social media platforms you've been posting on? And do you do video, or is it just audio?
For the podcast, we do just audio. And then on TikTok, we do like relatable. It took us a while to figure out what was going to work best for TikTok. We'd post stuff and it wouldn't get much engagement. And we tried a few different things. And finally, we had a few things that gained traction of trying to just grab people's attention, for people to be like, oh, I relate to this. And then be like, oh, what's this hot girl's code? And look into it.
On top of what Autie was saying, so I think what we struggled with at first with launching ourselves on TikTok is we wanted things to be educational, and it was really difficult figuring out, okay, how can we put the information we have in the podcast in this kind of bite-sized TikTok format? So we tried a few different things. Autie said we did pivot towards more really easy 5-second videos of just relatable content. And if you're a software developer and you have bugs in your code, then you're probably going to relate and you're probably going to give it a... So that's what we decided to pivot to. And I think that really helped our TikTok blow up. Well, not blow up, but got a little bit more traction, which is nice. But then it's interesting because we do have different strategies on TikTok compared to Instagram. So TikTok is more of those kind of funny, relatable 5-second videos that will hopefully get people to follow us on TikTok and then check out the podcast. Whereas our Instagram, we do try to keep it quite aesthetic and with more of kind of carousels of information explaining the concepts that we've spoken about in recent episodes, or like inspirational quotes and affirmations, but all making sure that it sticks in that like cohesive brand aesthetic.
Yeah, we treat TikTok as a way to try to capture more people because TikTok is so discoverable, whereas Instagram's more like where they stay. And another part of it is also just balancing doing this on top of our full-time jobs. If we could do this full-time and we could make educational videos with proper video editing and stuff, then we'd definitely blow up on TikTok in no time. But that was just something we just could not find feasible on top of doing our like episodes every fortnight, trying to have good quality content. And we're both people that we don't want to just do something 50% and have it not be that great and out there. Aside from social media marketing, we have done a few just like talks here and there in New Zealand where we're from. We've been really fortunate. We've had some organizations that have reached out and been like, hey, we do this program for like high school girls. Do you want to come speak at it? We also hosted our own first person event recently in Wellington. Oh, not recently, a couple months ago now, but that feels recently, down in Wellington in New Zealand. And that was where we had a panel, and so we had different people from industry, some people from the local university come along, and that was just a great way to get ourselves in front of people that maybe weren't looking for the podcast or don't use those social media channels. Try and be like, oh, these girls are cool, let me follow them. And it's worked pretty well. Every time we do some sort of speaking event, we get this nice little like uptake of people listening to us, and we're like, yes, we're reaching them.
We did also one time go into the University of Auckland, which is where we both studied, and it's the university of our city. And we went in there with a bunch of Hot Girls Code posters, and we were like, okay, let's just put these all around. And then I actually went back to the university a couple months later, and I was really stoked because I still saw some of the posters up, and I was like, yes, surely we're getting some university students following.
We had a little QR code that they could scan that would take them to our link tree so they could see like the podcast and the Instagram and stuff. And we were just like, a great way to hit the target audience. We were like, ask for forgiveness, not permission, if anyone tells us off for this. And no one did.
I love that. Oh my gosh, I just started trying to do the QR code situation. Do you have to pay for a QR code? I feel like there's a free way to use one, but everything I've seen so far, you've had to pay. Has that been your experience as well?
Now, there are definitely some free ones online. I think the ones that make you pay, they have like all these analytics and stuff. They'll tell you how many people scanned it and what link they went to and stuff. But yeah, we definitely used a free one.
I love that you were able to do panels and that people have reached out to you, but it totally makes sense. Very valuable, especially for an educational institution when people are potentially getting into like careers or majors that will land them in tech. What about your styles or structures of the interviews? How do you both kind of approach that or decide that? Do you think about topics way out ahead of time? Do you time them so that you talk about like IDs and then something else similar?
So we have a big spreadsheet document, which is basically just our episode schedule, and in that we plan out, okay, what do we want to talk about? What, like a little summary of what this is going to be about. And then we also color code it with the type of episode it is. So we tend to have some episodes related to women in tech, some about actual technical concepts themselves, some of them are interview episodes, and we basically try and make sure we have a mixture of different episodes coming up. So we might do an interview one week, and then the next time we release an episode, it's a technical concept. And then the next time we release, it's about industry concept, burnout or imposter syndrome. So we try and keep a bit of a balance of what we do. In terms of our interview episodes themselves, we normally have a talk to the person we're interviewing and we say, hey, what do you want to talk about on this episode? We also think about what we want to ask them about. And then we go away and we brainstorm some questions and we fit it under different topics, and then we get back to the person we're interviewing and we say, hey, we're really keen to talk about these things. We normally don't give them the specific questions because we want it to keep an element of surprise, but we'll let them know, oh yeah, this is the general topic.
And this has definitely been an iterative process. It's something that when we started we didn't follow that at all. The first interview, we literally gave them the exact questions we wanted. We didn't time box anything, and we learned a lot from that experience, and it was really great because from that we were like, okay, giving the exact questions rather than maybe example questions or just the general topics made them feel like they had to be way more prepared, and it put too much pressure on them. So we were like, okay, next time we won't do that. And then we had times where we had someone give us feedback like, oh, I didn't know how much time you wanted me to spend on each topic. I wasn't too sure. So we're like, great, we'll give some more guidelines. Sometimes we'll be like, oh, we'll spend 5 to 10 minutes on this, and it just helps them see the relative amount of time we want to spend on each thing, so they know whether or not they should be going into great detail about something, and if not, or if they need to, pull back. And then we also sometimes do just let the interview take where it gets us. So we'll be like recording we'll be on our Google Doc tracking how the episode is going. And sometimes we'll like, if we know we're going to skip a question, the other person will highlight the next question they're going to ask to indicate to the other person, oh, I'm jumping here. And then okay, we're going to skip down here, and we just go with it as it happens.
It's like a little bit of telepathic communication between me and Autie. We're like, okay, I'm highlighting this part, so that means skip this question. We're like, okay, yep, got it.
We've gotten really good at telepathic communication.
Wow, that's so fun that you get to do it together. And it's really interesting to hear about your experience with interviewing people. It's been an iterative process for me as well. I think I started with specific questions, and then I agree, it was like too much structure. And then I feel like I pivoted fully into letting the interview go where it would, because questions inevitably come up, I think. I'm always just curious about so many things, so it's easy for the conversation to just unfold and take an hour. And then now landing at the communicating the topics beforehand, which I like because it's less structured, but at least gives them they know what they're getting into.
We've also found it's really helpful because it means that if there's a topic we haven't said and they're really keen on talking about it, they can come back and be like, oh, I really want to talk about XYZ. Could we slip that in? And we're like, easy. And then we can prepare for that rather than getting to the end of the interview and being like, oh, I wish we talked about this. And then you're like, oh no, now I feel bad.
Yeah, if in any way they want to talk about something, I'm like, please. What's something I might not know that you think would be educational or interesting? Sometimes I ask that just because you never know. Okay, so how about editing? What do you guys use to edit? I think you mentioned GarageBand, but I'm just curious if there's any other things you use. Just as a fellow podcaster, would love to know.
Taking back to our origin story, when we spoke to Sim from Girls That Invest, and we were like, we don't even know how to get started. She literally was like, we just bought some mics, plugged them into our computers, and used GarageBand. And we were like, if it's good enough for Girls That Invest, it's good enough for us. And we have yet to iterate on that in terms of the actual stuff we use. So we're the best podcasting mics under a certain amount of money, and we just use GarageBand because it's pretty simple and straightforward to use. We have iterated on things like our mic placement. We learnt that was a very important thing. So you can't see, but I actually have a little foam thing that I put my mic on. There, Lola's holding hers up. So that it's closer to our mouths, so it captures the sound better and things like that. But a lot of it is still, I think, the way we see it is if the content is really good and the audio quality is listenable, then it's better for us to spend time on making other things better than trying to something that we're not struggling with. We found that this is what works for us for now. If we had more money, we would love to do something different, maybe upgrade our mics, use a different software, but this works for now. And we'd much rather spend time researching ways to market better and reach more people, do more talks, do more educational things, rather than trying to research best free editing software and things like that.
Yeah, totally fair. I recently switched from GarageBand. I now use something called Descript. It also does video, and you can cut words and you can go through the transcript and cut things, because I used to use GarageBand and I was just struggling with the time it would take me. I would do it all hand and cut out ums and stuff like that and silences.
I do think part of it's also we've fortunately gotten a lot better at recording now that, because I think we just recorded our 37th episode. So we've done a lot of them. And definitely when we started, it would take so long to edit because we'd have lots of ums and ahs, or we'd trip up on our words a lot. Whereas I think now we've gotten a lot more comfortable, a lot more confident. We have a lot less, so it has taken less time to edit the episodes. Still probably would be faster if we used something else, but it's fine for now.
Autie knows all of our filler words. She's, you always say...
As very common.
Yeah, my thing was always someone would finish speaking and then I still struggle with it, but I'm like, yeah, and then I get to whatever my next thought is.
We do lots of, that was a really big issue with interview episodes, is I would be editing out the other person being like, and we'd be like, oh no, we're just trying to support them while they talk, but it's really not working.
I know. Yeah, that's relatable. Okay, have you breached or researched or investigated any sorts of monetization for the podcast yet, or are you considering doing that in the future?
So that is something that we're super interested in at the moment. We have been looking into different funding options, for example, through grants in New Zealand. We have applied for one grant, which we're waiting to hear back from, but we're feeling very hopeful because, as Autie said, things like getting better recording software, getting better microphones, getting better editing software, that's something that we think would be really realistic if we do manage to get some funding. So that is one big option for us. We've also been discussing other ways we can monetize Hot Girls Code. So we're thinking of potentially other products, because a really important thing for us is that we do want to keep the podcast itself free, because a really important aspect of it is the accessibility. And we want for young girls in high school, if they're thinking about coding and they feel like they're not good enough at it or they're intimidated, we want them to have Hot Girls Code, the podcast, as a resource. But we are currently considering, okay, maybe we could do some merch, or maybe we could do some other kind of pay-for product. But yeah, it's something that's in the works at the moment. But as we said, we do this all for free, all on top of a full-time job. So we are thinking of, okay, how can we really make this a side hustle and get some money?
Grants is a great idea, actually, especially with your podcast. So it's an excellent opportunity. It's tough to prioritize sometimes because often the podcast gets whatever's left over from my energy, because at the end of the day, the full-time job is the source of how I pay everything. And I hope to monetize this as well one day. But I'm not even sure if I should target monetization until I reach a certain growth point, or I reach a certain number of downloads or listeners or subscribers. I think that's another question I have for my own thing. Do I even have the right to ask for funding? It's still really small. Should I wait longer?
It's hard to know, eh?
Yeah. And because we also had that, because we also have that fear of, well, what if you try to monetize so early and then people don't see the value in it? I'm not going to pay this much money for this or that. I'm not invested enough. Whereas once you have delivered enough value to people that you're like, hey, here's some extra value you can get, then they trust it enough to spend money on it. Yeah, it's definitely a tricky thing to balance.
Or even something like merch, because one thing that we've been thinking about is like, how cool would it be to have Hot Girls Code laptop stickers that people could purchase? But is the demand actually there? Do we have enough people that would actually want to buy that? So yeah, it's balancing that demand and how many listeners you have with, okay, what can we actually do that's like easy and accessible way to make money?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I would buy one for sure.
Yay! That's one.
We'll have one purchase. This is how we're market researching one-on-one.
Yeah, I'm down. Okay. How do you manage to get feedback? It's a little tough when people are on Spotify. All you can do is follow or rate.
We definitely try and use our Instagram as like a feedback channel as well. We'll put up like polls of, do you enjoy these types of episodes? What do you guys like listening to? And then even just question boxes. What do you want to hear from? Do you have any feedback? But obviously it can be quite hard sometimes. Not many people will respond, or you'll have like a handful of people and then you're like, are they representing the majority or not? One thing we do is if we do get like nice DMs and like compliments and stuff, we screenshot those and we have a Google Doc. We save all of them to just reminders of like, first of all, like we're having an impact, but also just like these are the things that people are connecting with enough that they're taking the time to write the message. So if we want to experiment with things, make sure we try and keep those things.
It's literally called our hype document. So it's like any hype that we've gotten from people or anyone being like, oh my god, I loved this episode. We're like, okay, screenshot, let's put it in the doc. And then if we're ever feeling like demotivated or uninspired, we can just open that up and realize, oh, actually people are listening to this and they're really enjoying it. And that kind of inspires us to keep going.
So one thing we've been doing recently is going through our analytics and looking at the listen time for our different episodes and like the amount of like completion. And there'll be some episodes they just have like really low rates for completion, and we're like, okay, is that because people didn't engage with the content, or is it because it's a newer episode and people haven't come back to finish it? And so when things like that happen, we're just trying to keep an eye on the trends with those.
One point in an episode where suddenly the listener rate goes from 90% to 50%. And it's, okay, what were we talking about at that moment that made so many people sign off? So we do try and keep a look at those analytics and see, okay, what episodes are performing well. That's supplemented by polls and questions on Instagram, just so we can get like that direct feedback.
Yeah, because sometimes we'll interestingly get DMs from people saying they found a particular episode really helpful, and then when we look at the analytics, it's got like very average analytics, but it's the one that has had a lot of contact on social media of people saying, this is valuable, I've really connected with this, I found this useful. And so you have to balance the two of the numbers versus the anecdotal stuff. And we try to always remember, if even just one person is really helped by one of these things, then it's worth putting in there.
Do you use Google Analytics? Is that how you see like where they drop off, or how do you see that?
So we use Spotify for podcasters as our platform, and you can go into the episodes and see the analytics, and you can see the listens and the play times and stuff like that, and then we manually put them into a spreadsheet. I'm
gonna do that later, because I actually didn't know if you could see completion time or listen time. So I'm fully been going off of number of downloads. And sometimes I feel like people only find my episodes through the people that I interview, if they repost it or something. And that's not helpful, because ultimately I'm looking for the listeners who will return, like people who want to be there week after week.
We're looking at some of our episodes that had the fastest growth had some of the lowest completion rates. And so that would have been probably people finding it, but not everyone finished it. Whereas some of the other ones that were a bit slower, they still had lots of numbers. They'd been out longer as well. So we don't know quite how those metrics work. Sometimes we wonder if it's been out longer, maybe people have gone back and finished it. Whereas if they're newer, maybe people haven't. But those ones that took like longer to grow have 100% completion.
How would you say your goals are for the future with the podcast, like having the experience that you have had so far?
So I think some of our main goals at the moment are definitely the funding, monetization aspect of things. That's definitely one avenue that we're wanting to consider. And then building on that, another thing that we really want to get into more is outreach. So we really want to connect with university groups and high school groups and either do talks or presentations just to be the face and show like, hey, we're young women in tech, this is a place that you can be as well, and to really just show it's not as scary as it may seem, because I know like when we were younger it was like, this is freaky, and it's like all of these older men. So yeah, just really being a face for that and doing some outreach, that's one aspect we definitely want to get into.
Yeah, that will be really lovely and helpful for a lot of people, I'm sure. And I also asked that question because it's like tricky to set goals with a podcast. I think it's been a new experience for me, and I'm not sure which I should target, because ultimately whatever I target is where I'll spend my time, and there's a lot of different like options for that. So I'm thinking of doing an event in my city for aspiring entrepreneurs, something to encourage people with an idea that are like scared to pursue it, because I think there's a big barrier to that as well, probably especially for women maybe. But it's hard to understand how that will have an impact, but I guess to some extent you don't know until you try.
When we did our first in-person event, I think we were very surprised with how much of an impact that did make. We were really worried. We were hopeful and optimistic, but we'd never hosted a panel before together. We weren't sure if people would engage with it. We weren't sure if it would actually translate to people engaging with Hot Girls Code. But it ended up being that some of our responses and the way we drove the conversation, and we had people come up to us afterwards and chat to us, and
it also showed people that we were open to going to their events and speaking at their events and things. And so it ended up being really cool, and we had a lot of people that started listening to the podcast after attending that event, which we honestly weren't sure that was going to happen. We hoped, but we were just like, you just have to try it, and if it doesn't work, then you learn from it, and if it does work, that's great.
Yeah, I think that's great as well, because I think that another way people hear about podcasts is just hearing about a podcast from other people or people who have a podcast. So even if like you get those listeners maybe recurringly, they might also talk to people they know about this podcast they now listen to, and that's like a whole thing as well. What do you think has been something that's been fulfilling so far from this whole experience?
We've recently hit 10,000 plays on Spotify, which was a very exciting milestone for us. So that definitely was like, oh my gosh, people are actually listening to us. That's awesome. But I think in terms of kind of fulfillment, for me personally, the best part is just getting those individual messages from girls all over the world saying, oh, I found your podcast in my English class and I'm actually wanting to study computer science, and it's made me feel less fear to actually be able to do that. And I think that is just the coolest thing, being able to impact people on that individual scale and to show them actually tech is a place for you. Like, we're out here killing it, you can be out here killing it too. These technical concepts aren't as scary as they may seem. And I think just actually getting that feedback from people that we are making an impact is just so awesome.
Yeah, I definitely have to second what Lola said. I remember one time we got a piece of feedback that someone said, listen to our podcast, felt like being on a call with their two best friends. And I think like something like that, just, it's exactly what we wanted. We wanted it to feel that way for people, and knowing that you get to have that impact and having those messages from, girls that will say, oh, I'm the only girl in my computer science class, and sometimes I just have to put my headphones in and listen to you two talk because it reminds me that I deserve to be here. And knowing that we get to do that is just, it's so fulfilling. It makes it all so worth it. I saw a TikTok that said most podcasts don't last after 20 episodes. Most of them reach 20 if they do, and they drop off because people lose interest. And we were like, we just have to hit 21, and then we know that we've pushed through it and we've hit it. And now we're up to, I don't know what we've just released, 34, 35, but we've recorded up to 37, I think. And we're still going, we still have so many more, and we're still so excited. So that was just like personally a really fulfilling thing of being like, we set this goal and we were able to create a sustainable way of making the podcast and making it enjoyable in such a way that we could just keep going.
Yeah, I've seen a similar statistic, and like podcast burnout, or like they lose motivation because they're not growing as quickly as, and that's definitely like, I've experienced that as well. It's like tricky because like I didn't really have a specific goal with downloads or like statistics or anything because I didn't really know what to expect. But I think after a while of putting all the manual effort for editing and like reaching out to people for interviews and just like all the little bits and pieces, if there's not a huge amount of growth, it can feel discouraging. That's amazing, and it makes me think of this experience I've had. So last year I did create a TikTok and I picked a niche, and my niche was a woman in STEM, or a female software engineer. And some of my biggest videos were literally just about college was challenging because I felt like I was like the only girl. Some girls who would comment like something similarly. Oh, it was nice to see that can be done. So it makes me think of that there's definitely like a need for that. And there are still girls going through that right now, even though. But as for the challenges of producing it with a full-time job,
so initially when we started, we did weekly, and we basically reached a point where we were like, oh, this isn't feeling as fun anymore, and it's feeling like it's too much. And we spent ages being like, oh, so what do we do? Like, how do we handle it? And we decided, why don't we move to fortnightly? Will it actually make such a difference? Because we did a lot of research, and the most important thing was consistency. So it didn't matter if it was going to be fortnightly over weekly. The most important thing was being consistent with what we did. And that's why we made that decision to switch, because we were like, on top of a full-time job, when you start and you're so excited and you're so motivated, you can do weekly a bit more easily. But as we also wanted to pursue more with our social media and doing talks, doing different things, we were like, we can't keep that good quality podcast episode if we try to keep it weekly. So we switched down to a fortnightly schedule, and that's worked so much better. It means we have a week where we work on actually planning the episode and getting it what we want it to be. And then when we come to record it, it's actually easier to record it and then easier to edit it because we've put that like work into planning it a bit more. And then, as Lola said earlier, we have those mental health check-ins on our weekly meetings that we do. And that was so that we could know to pull back when we need to and add more to our plate when we feel up to it. And sometimes we'll have a note from it. We'll be like, we need to take it easy. Things are not going well in life. Let's chill out a bit. And it'll just mean we can set that expectation with each other. And when we are working on the episode, we know we can't give it 100% and that's okay. But what can we do with what we have?
Yeah, I think a big part has just been that transparent communication between me and Autie as well. That is why we have the mental health check-in. So if one of us is having just a really meh week, we can say, hey, sorry, I just don't have capacity to do this. Do you mind if we push it back to the next week? So we really try and be super flexible with the way we run it. And we also make sure that we have time to reflect back and look at how our processes are going, what can be improved. So at the end of our first season, we actually ran a little mini retro together, and it was just like, okay, what's going well? What can we improve on? So we're always trying to iteratively change things and improve it and just make sure that this is still like a sustainable thing for both of us.
The most important thing is that we are enjoying it. This is something that we're doing for fun outside of work, and if we're not enjoying it, then we're not going to create something that's enjoyable for other people. And yeah, we definitely have that on the forefront of our mind.
That's such an important reminder, and I experienced something very similar. I was like, we're gonna do weekly, let's go, and very quickly hit a wall and actually needed outside assistance for someone to be like, listen, this isn't sustainable, because I was in denial. I was like, listen, I'm going to keep doing this every week.
I can do it.
I was just so stubborn about it, but realistically, that time is so much better spent thinking about enhancements, all the things we talked about that can be done to enhance the show and bring in more listeners and think about the impact. And then I completely agree. I think it's such a good reminder that if I'm not genuinely enthusiastic about what I'm bringing to people see that. It's very obvious, it's very visible. So it's just important that I continue to believe in what I'm doing, because if I don't believe in it, like, why would anyone else? That's just something that's hard to sink in sometimes, but it's important to remember. Okay, to wrap up, what are both of your goals for the future? Not just in terms of the podcast. What do you think about your future, the future of your careers in tech? And then with the podcast, is this something you hope to carry for like as long as you can, or what are your thoughts on that?
That's a tough question.
For some context, Lola and I are both in our like mid-20s, so the quarter life crisis is so real. So whenever someone's, what are you doing with your life? You're like, that is such a good question. I'll let you know and I figure it out.
Oh my god, no. I know.
I don't know. So we have more short-term goals than long-term goals. So like for me, like I'm really passionate about like tech and in general, and I just love like technology and I love learning and the challenge of it all. So like my main focus right now is to just technically learn as much as I can and take on like challenging projects at work and really upskill, and then also be able to use that for the podcast where I can be like, here are all these weird random things I'm learning about that I wish I had known when I started, or here are some buzzwords I've been hearing like thrown around, let's do episodes about that so they don't feel like dumb buzzwords. And so in terms of the podcast, yeah, we're trying to take it as it comes. We'd love to do it as long as possible and to really evolve it into something that can be such a great tool for people. But it is letting our audience and the world also drive where it goes, because when we started, one of the things we really wanted to focus on was girls in high school and university. And an interesting audience that we've also found along the way is people that are career changers, so people that have a bit older into another career and are now retraining into tech. And so now we're like, oh, okay, so now we need to try and evolve how we approach Hot Girls Go to include those people as well, because that's such a great audience. So that's like a good reminder that we can't necessarily make a plan and follow it. We got to take on what comes our way.
Another important goal of Auntie's is that next year she's going to take off 4 months at work, and I think that's just something very important to point out.
Yeah, it's also a goal of mine.
Oh my gosh, is work gonna let you do that? And then
Yeah, they were so supportive. It was so lovely because we've had a lot of people. So in New Zealand, it's known as your OE, your overseas experience. I don't know if it's common in other countries, but a lot of people, usually earlier in their 20s, but COVID has ruined it a bit for people. They just move overseas for 2 to 3 years. And basically, I was like to work, I was like, you know how everyone's doing that? I'm not planning to do that, but I would love 3 months off work to go traveling instead. And they were just like, yeah, that's totally fine. Like, I'll have been at the company for about 4.5 years at that point. And they were like, you've given us a lot. You work really hard. If this is really important to you, let's make it work. And I was like, okay.
That's amazing. I would love something like that. That's amazing. I'm really glad
so
you
excited.
did that.
In terms of my goals, I think for me, because I've had a sort of interesting career. So I started out as a software developer, a full stack developer. And then after about a year and a bit, I went into a non-technical role. So I was a delivery lead, which is basically like a bit like a product owner / a scrum master. It was like a bit of a hybrid between those two roles. And I did that for a year and a bit. And now I've just recently gone back to being a full stack developer because I got sick of having meetings just every day 9 to 5. And I was like, okay, no, I just need some time to do some coding and do some problem solving. So yeah, a big goal for me at the moment is just upskilling in my technical abilities. And because I think one thing that I've really struggled with is deciding whether I want to stay in a technical role or do more kind of management and non-technical stuff. And then perhaps sometime in the future I might pivot and I might want to go into more of the management role. But for the time being, I really want to have that like solid foundation of technical knowledge. So that is a big goal for me at the moment. And in terms of the future...
Okay, thanks for sharing your goals. Trust me, this year has been interesting. It is really hard to make goals when you don't know where necessarily you'll want to be in a year or 2 years or whatever. But I'm always curious to know what other people are thinking, so that's why I asked that question. But I think the last question I'd love to ask you both is some advice you might give to someone listening who might aspire to either work in tech or start a podcast, because that is something you both have extensive experience with now as well.
I think my piece of advice applies for both, whether they are considering working in tech or wanting to start a podcast. It's not as scary as you think it is. You just have to start, and Google is your friend. And that applies for both tech and podcasting. That's what I've done for so much of my career and so much of the stuff we do for Hot Girls Code. It is a lot of figuring it out as you go along and being okay to not be perfect when you start, and just trying to do your best and learn from that as you go on.
My advice is quite similar. I have always been a bit of a perfectionist, and I struggle to start new things because as soon as you start a new thing, you are not going to be good at it. You're probably going to suck and you're going to fail and it's not going to go well. But the thing is, if you don't start, then if you don't put out your first podcast episode, you're never going to reach your 100th podcast episode and get that audience and start building a following. Yeah, the most important thing to do is just start. And even if that means you just spend 30 minutes a day researching, you can just start out small, but the most important thing is just to start.
Yeah, those are both great pieces of advice. Perfectionism is tough, and I agree. Sometimes it's just not a cute journey. Like, there's a lot of different incremental steps, but I think what I try to remember is that like consistent effort, even if it's just a little bit at a time, will end up getting you somewhere. Those are all the questions I have, but this has been so lovely. So thank you both for your time and for getting back to me and sharing all that information. You've definitely helped me, and then I'm hoping any listeners as well will get a lot out of this.
Oh, thank you so much for having us on. It's been so lovely to meet you, and yeah, it's awesome what you're doing.
This has just felt like a nice little chat amongst friends more than like a scary interview or anything like that. And also, I am very obsessed with your accent. Like, every time you talk, I'm just like, oh, I just feel zen and like peaceful. Like, the Kiwi accent, we're just always in a rush when we talk.
Oh my gosh, I feel the same way.
Thank you for listening to Passion Project Pending. If you have any feedback on the show, or you or someone you know would like to be interviewed about your passion project, please head to my website, passionprojectpenny.com, to leave feedback or submit an application to be interviewed. I'd love to learn about your business. And I'm talking any sort of feedback. You don't like the way I speak? Let's hear it. You think I say that was really educational too much? I want to hear it. The good, the bad, the inevitably ugly. Thank you so much.